So today, for this message and over the next 2 weeks, I wanted to start a series called Faith in Troubled Times. It seemed very appropriate with this coronavirus time that we live in. I know that you and that many folks are affected. There's folks who have the coronavirus or who have loved ones who are suffering with it or are in great danger to get it. I know there are folks who are in the medical profession or who have loved ones who are, and there's that great fear and that concern for them. I know there's others who are feeling the loneliness and the isolation that social distancing is created. And I know there are others who are feeling the economic challenges. They've lost their jobs or their income has been severely affected. And this is a troubled time for them. And I thought that you and all of us could need some biblical encouragement, some biblical advice. And so I want to look at 3 different people and how they responded to troubled times. In this message, we'll look at Job, then next week at Joseph, and then we'll end with Jesus. So Job is one of the older books in the Bible, and it deals with one of the oldest of issues, and that's troubled times. It's very much of a teaching story, not unlike the stories that Jesus told that clearly had a message as part of them. And right away in this story, we get the sense that it's in the story kind of format because we hear God and Satan having a conversation. And the whole book is a mix of poetry and also of prose. So the story starts out that Job is an incredibly faithful man, but Satan says to him, he's only faithful because you've really blessed him because everything's going well. Let me cause him some trouble and then we'll see what happens. And God allows this to happen. Again, very story-like. And everything happens to bad Job all at once. His crops are destroyed, his livestock are killed or captured by enemies. There's natural calamities that come along, including the fact that all of his children are gathered for a party and a tornado destroys the house and kills them all. It's a really, really difficult time for Job. But this is how Job responds in chapter 1. Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshiped. He said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. Job has such an amazing faith in God. It kind of reminds me of a wonderful lady I knew named Sharon Weaver. In my previous congregation, we started a preschool from scratch. It's a dream we have here at St. Paul's as well. And what we did in my previous congregation was we hired someone who helped us start the preschool and then led it for many years, and that was Sharon. But unfortunately, the last 8 years of Sharon's life, she wrestled with cancer. But she had an amazing theme song in her life. She would go and find it and sing it, and it would give her strength. And it was based on this scripture verse. It's called "Blessed Be Your Name." And the song describes what Job describes, that when good things happen or bad things happen, I will bless your name. And Sharon was one who really held on to blessing the Lord's name as Job does. God was touched in the book of Job by Job's faithfulness, but then Satan says, let me do more to him, and he gives him loathsome sores, like boils from his head to his foot. And then we hear, then his wife, this is Job's wife, said to him, Do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die. This is his wife saying this to him. But he said to her, you speak as any foolish woman would speak. Shall we receive the good at the hand of God and not receive the bad? I mean, he recognizes that life has its good and his bad. In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. He stays faithful to God. Well, then the next piece of what happens in the story is that 3 friends heard of all of these troubles that had come upon him. Each of them set out from his home, names, Eliphaz of Temanite, Bildad of Shuhite, and Zophar the Zamathite, something like that. They met together to go and console and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him, and they raised their voices and wept aloud. They tore their robes and threw dust in the air upon their heads. They sat with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. You know, this is kind of the best thing that they do, is they just sit with him in silence. And sometimes that's all you can do with somebody going through troubled times. It reminds me of a story that I heard of a young man studying to be a pastor, and he was sent off on a difficult first visit. There was a man who had recently been diagnosed as having terminal cancer. And so the young pastoral intern goes in and sits with him and is about to say something, and everything that he thinks of to say is woefully inadequate to this terrible news that this man has gotten. And so he tries again and can't find any words, and he sits there frustrated, not finding anything. It's quite a while, and in just abject frustration, he eventually gets up and leaves, not having said anything. He's so upset. He goes back to the church. He goes to talk to his supervisor, and he says, I think I'm in the wrong profession. I couldn't think of anything to say. I was a total failure. And the pastor says, well, actually, after you left, the man called me, and he wanted to thank you. He wanted to thank you because you didn't try and fill the space with inane words that weren't going to help a whole lot, that you just sat with him in silence, he said was the greatest blessing. That's what his friends do at first. But then they start talking. And in a long poetic section, they basically keep saying to Job, what did you do wrong? Clearly, you've done something wrong that God has given you such difficulty. And Job responds to them, and it kind of wears Job down until finally, in the 16th chapter, we hear, then Job answered, I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all. Miserable comforters. Have windy words no limit? Or what provokes you that you keep on talking? And then Job starts talking directly to God. In long poetic sections, Job pours out his pain to God. He notes how difficult life is, and it can be difficult. A lot of anger comes out from him. He talks about how unfair life is and generally how confused and frustrated he is with God. Maybe you as well have known times like Job, and maybe you're going through them now. Maybe this coronavirus has put you in a place just like Job, where there's the anger and the frustration and the confusion and the pain and all of this. Job continues on like this until the 38th chapter, when finally God responds to Job. In the 38th chapter, we hear, "Then the Lord answered Job out of a whirlwind. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge?" I really like the way the Message Bible translates that verse. Why do you talk without knowing what you're talking about? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? Or on what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? This is the language of a house builder. And he's asking, were you there? Do you know how the earth was built? When the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted with joy? Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed bounds for it, and set bars and doors, and said, thus far shall you come and no further, and here shall your proud waves be stopped. God continues in this way, describing the miracles of the world and of the universe, of the natural world and the mystery of life. And this is just in the time of Job. How much more could we describe the miracles of this world? All the physics, the biology, the chemistry that makes up our world in its incredible complexity, all the way from subatomic particles to the miracles of the universe and things like black holes. All this amazing stuff that we really don't fully understand and are still trying to do so. This goes on until the 42nd chapter. And then Job answered the Lord, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. And kind of a hearkening back to God talking to Job, hear and I will speak, I will question you, and you declare to me. And Job responds, I had heard of you by the hearing of my ear, but now my eyes see you. It was kind of like he knew about God, but he didn't know God until these challenging times. This is really the climax of the book of Job. And then as Job ends, the friends are rebuked for their words to Job, and Job's fortune and his life and his family is restored. But the message that comes from the book of Job, what Job comes to understand about God, is that he does not understand God. But he does learn to trust God. That's a message for all of us in troubled times, that we do not understand God's ways. As much as we would want to, we don't. But that we can trust in God. I started by naming how this story is sort of a teaching story. But I want to end with a story about two real people and their troubled times like Job. It's the story of David and Nancy Guthrie. They live in the Nashville area. And years ago, when they went through troubled times, David worked for Word Music. It's a Christian music company. And Nancy was a publicist and helped to support some great Christian speakers like Max Lucado. But in 1999, they were expecting their second child. Her name was Hope. And when she was born, it was pretty obvious that she had disabilities. And as the doctors examined Hope, they told her parents that she had something called Zellweger syndrome. It's a problem, a birth defect that's on the cellular level, that's missing an important part of the cell, and basically the poisons in the cell build up. And when you have this disease, you're expected to live less than 6 months. By the way, the odds of somebody having this recessive gene are 1 in 160, and that a child would have this disease are 1 in 100,000. Their little girl, Hope, only lived 199 days. And going through that great pain, they decided that David would have a vasectomy so that they wouldn't have any other children. But unfortunately, that did not take. That, by the way, is like a 1 in 2,000 chance. And they were expecting a little boy named Gabriel. When David announced to their church that they were expecting another child, the people in the church applauded for them. Until David shared that by testing, Gabriel would also have Zellweger syndrome. And they say when he announced this to the congregation as well, there were gasps. Not again for them. Their little boy, Gabriel, lived just 183 days. And yet through all of that, the Guthries remained faithful. Today, David and his son Matthew, they write Christian children's musicals for churches. And Nancy has become a Christian writer and a speaker. She travels all around teaching the Bible and helping people wrestle with grief. They both lead retreats for parents who have been through things like they've been through. And like Job, they met God even more deeply. Didn't maybe understand why these things happen, but met God more deeply. This is how Nancy writes about that. Job was blessed through his brokenness by his restless pursuit of God. He had a new, more intimate relationship with God, one he could have never found without pain and sorrow. In the darkest of days, she writes, we've experienced a supernatural strength and peace. Like Job, we often cannot see the hidden purposes of God, but we can determine to be faithful and keep walking toward him in the darkness. I pray that that would be true for you in whatever troubled times, now or in the future, you would walk through. Amen.